Morning. It's good to see you guys this morning. We are finishing up our Esther series. And before I talk about Esther, I want to talk to you about another person from the Bible by the name of Joseph, okay? And not the Joseph. By the way, did everybody get the worship program? Anybody need the worship program notes and everything? Abel, can you grab a few to... Thank you, Abel. All right, raise your hand if you need it, and we'll hook you up. All right. I want to talk to you real quick about another person from the Bible by the name of Joseph. Joseph was he was a few generations after Abraham, and he's way before Esther. Okay, so if you're just trying to kind of keep a Bible timeline of what's going on. And anyway, some of you may be familiar with the story of Joseph. But anyway, Joseph he was the 11th child of 12, okay? The 11th son of 12 sons. And his older brothers hated him, so they sold Joseph into slavery. And Joseph... He was, it's pretty bad that your brothers would do that to you, right? And so anyway, his brothers, they did that to him, sold him into slavery. He ends up going to Egypt. While he's in Egypt, he had just some different things happen to him that he ended up going to jail, and then some other, and it wasn't because he did anything wrong. And then he ends up becoming second in command of the nation of Egypt, which at the time, Egypt was probably the most powerful nation in the world. And so Joseph comes into that position, and in that he comes into that position and really helps Egypt to prosper and to succeed. And he knows that there's a famine that is coming soon. There's going to be a food shortage, and so Joseph is leading them saving food back so that they'll have food ready for whenever this food shortage happens. And so, of course, because the food shortage happens, now all of a sudden Joseph's brothers, who had sold him into slavery, are looking for food, and they hear, hey, Egypt has food, let's go down to Egypt and let's buy food. And so they show up to Egypt to buy food, and guess who they run into? They run into Joseph. And Joseph is the one who hands out the food. He sees his brothers, he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. And Joseph has this opportunity at this time that he could really pay his brothers back for what they had done to him, right? They had sold him into slavery. He lost all these years with his father. He lost all these years with his family. He had to live in this foreign land, learn a different language, all these different things. Had to go to prison, had to be falsely accused, had all these different things happen to him because of his brothers. And now he has an opportunity right here. He's second in command of the most powerful nation in the world. And Joseph has an opportunity right now to pay his brothers back. Here they are, they're bowing before him. He has full power, full ability to be able to just wreak havoc on his brothers. And he doesn't do it. In fact, he accepts his brothers and he welcomes them in. He lets them know that he wants them to come live with him in Egypt and to bring his father down. And so his brothers are like, okay, cool. He wants everything to go well, but maybe he just wants to do that because he wants a relationship with our father. You know what I mean? If he does anything to us, then that's going to hurt his relationship with our father. And so the brothers were like, as long as our dad is alive, we should be good with Joseph. Well, obviously, eventually the father passes away, and the brothers are left there, and they begin to get worried. What's going to happen? Is Joseph is he going to retaliate? Now is he going to get his revenge on us? And so they go to talk to Joseph and to say, please have mercy on us. Don't get revenge on us for what we did to you all those years ago. And Joseph said, brothers, I am not mad at you. I'm not angry with you. I don't want revenge. I don't want to retaliate for what y'all did to me all those years ago. What you meant for evil, he said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Because of what you did, because you sold me into slavery, I was able to be put in this position that I am in to be able to save your lives right now. And not just your lives, but many others throughout the world. And Joseph realized the good that came out of the evil that was done. And because of that, Joseph said, I am not going to get revenge. I am not going to retaliate. Even though you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. And so today we're talking about the idea of revenge and getting revenge and wanting to retaliate. And we see all throughout the Bible where it talks about not getting revenge and not retaliating. And we even see different people like Paul, the Apostle Paul, this is later on in the New Testament, after he's going around teaching people about Jesus, and he's thrown into prison because he's telling people about Jesus, trying to explain how that Jesus is the way for salvation. And Paul writes a letter to one of the churches and says, please don't mourn for me, don't cry for me, don't think that this is a bad thing. Rejoice along with me that this bad and that this evil is happening, because, he says, because I'm in prison, I have the opportunity to tell people about Jesus that I would never have the opportunity I would never have that opportunity otherwise. Don't seek revenge, don't seek retaliation, rejoice in this evil that is happening. So that kind of is an introduction as it leads us into Esther's story. As we look at Esther, and just to kind of give a quick recap, Esther is a Jew. We're living in the Persian Empire. The king, his name is King Xerxes. If you've watched the movie 300, then that's the king, the Persian king that we're talking about, King Xerxes. And King Xerxes, he got mad at his current wife, whose name was Vashti. He got mad at her, got rid of her, had a beauty pageant, chose Esther because she was so beautiful, both inside and outside. And Esther also had a cousin whose name was Mordecai, and Mordecai had adopted Esther as his own. And so, Mordecai had an enemy in the king's palace by the name of Haman. Haman tried to have not only Mordecai killed, but tried to have all of the Jews and the whole Persian Empire wiped out. He had convinced the king to set up a decree, an edict, a law that said that on a certain day, in the 12th month of the year, that anybody had the right to go and to kill any Jew they want to, and to take all of their belongings. And so the Jews rose up and began to pray, began to fast. Esther went and talked to the king and convinced the king that Haman was evil, and Haman had planned on killing Mordecai. Haman ended up dying himself on that same device that he wanted to kill Mordecai. If you remember, I talked about the platform that he had built as a 75-foot pole, and the way the Persians would do this is they would impale a person on that pole, and they would just be left there hanging with that pole going through their body. And that's how Haman wanted to kill Mordecai, but instead the king put Haman on that pole and had him impaled and had him killed. The edict or the law could not be reversed. Esther asked the king to cancel the law, but the Persians had a rule that once the king put his stamp of approval, put his signet ring on it, it was done. You couldn't change it. And so they couldn't cancel the law, but the king allowed Mordecai, who he gave as Haman's position, he gave Mordecai second in command of the whole empire of Persia, and he gave Mordecai the ability to write another law. And Mordecai and some others, they wrote another law, put the king's signet ring on it that said that the Jews had the right to defend themselves on that day. On that day when people would attack them, they had the right to bear arms and to defend themselves and to kill any army that came against them to try to kill them. And they even had the right to kill the women and the children of that army and to take their stuff if they were attacked. So that leads us up to Esther chapter 9. And Esther has 10 chapters, and so we're going to cover 9, and 10's really not much there. But anyway, Esther chapter 9, we see the day comes that the first decree, okay? In Esther chapter 9, we see this first decree that said that anybody that wanted to could come and slaughter the Jews. And so, but it's also the day that the second decree allows for the Jews to rise up and to defend themselves, right? And so you have this battle coming, and it's just kind of been looming over the kingdom that this day is coming. And it's interesting as you read through chapter 9 to see how the majority opinion of the Persian Empire, the majority of people, their attitudes have changed towards the Jews. When Haman was second in command and was sending out this decree that says you can kill any Jew you want and take their stuff, people were against the Jews. But when Haman died and Mordecai became second in command, and Mordecai is a Jew, people's attitudes began to change. They began to say, those anti-Semitic, those Jewish jokes that we were saying yesterday, they don't seem so funny anymore. So we're not going to be that anymore. We're going to, Jews, they're pretty cool. They're all right, and so I kind of like them, And you start seeing this attitude start to change. And not only that, but people started to convert over to becoming Jews themselves because of fear of the Jews. And if you think through it, like that people in the nation, they didn't get to see what we get to read in Esther about what happened in the palace, what happened between Haman and Esther and all those different things. They didn't get to see all of that. All they knew was there's this man Haman that was in charge who hated the Jews. Okay, they knew that was there. And then all of a sudden there's this all of a sudden Haman is killed because remember he was impaled on that pole for everybody to see, and all of a sudden there's Haman who's killed. Mordecai, who is a Jew, takes his position. It's found out that Esther, the queen, is also a Jew, and then the opinions of the crowd and of the people in the nation would have changed dramatically, and people began to see that we need to be more on the Jews' side and not against them. And so that's kind of the perspective that we look at. And so on that day, when more people probably would have attacked the Jews, now you have more people that are on their side and willing to defend them. And it says even the governors and people that are in authority were on the Jews' side. But there were still those who were diehard, okay, who were enemies, and they wanted to attack the Jews, okay? They still wanted to attack them, and it didn't matter what the public opinion was. They still had this hatred, and they still were going to attack them no matter what, okay? Some of those being Haman's sons. Haman had 10 sons, and of course, they want to avenge their father. They want to carry on their father's hatred. Their father probably taught them to have a hatred for the Jews, and so they just grew up with that. And then to know that it's because of the Jews that their father has been killed, because it's not really that they really came against him. It's just that Haman tried to attack them first, and so, but now they're going to want to get their revenge. So we look at Esther chapter 9. Verses 5 and 6, it says, and with their swords, the Jewish people defeated all their enemies, killing and destroying them. And they did what they wanted with those people who hated them. In the palace at Susa, they killed and destroyed 500 men. And so we see here that the Jews had favor, they had victory, they were able to overcome those who attacked them, and even in the capital city of Susa, they were able to win the victory, kill 500 men who tried to attack them, 10 of those being Haman's sons, and they had victory. Now remember, we said that the second law that went out said they could defend themselves, and they could also kill women, they could kill the children, and they could take all the stuff. Remember, they had that right in the law that was sent out. But we see here, and we're going to read this in verses 10 and 16, it says, but the Jewish people did not take their belongings. They defeated these people, they killed them, but they didn't take their stuff. Verse 16, it says, at the same time, all the Jewish people in the king's empire also met to protect themselves and get rid of their enemies. They killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not take their belongings. And so they had the right to take their stuff, to kill their women, to kill their children, but they didn't do it. They left it there. Now, it doesn't say that they didn't kill the women and children, but it kind of leads you to believe that because they didn't take their belongings, which made you kind of leads you to believe that they left it there for the women and the children. And so they had the right to do that, but they didn't. All they did was defend themselves against those who were attacking them. So the principle that we can learn from this is when we have the right and the opportunity to retaliate, we should reconsider. When we have the right and the opportunity to retaliate, we should reconsider. The Jews were not retaliating against people who were attacking them. They were just defending themselves. For them to actually get revenge on them, it would have been to take their belongings, to take their stuff, to get revenge on these people that are attacking them. If you think about retaliation, it leads to a circle of retaliation, right? You get revenge, and then that person wants to get revenge back. And so if you think in this instance that we're talking about here in Esther, that if the Jews would have fully gotten revenge, they kill the women, they kill the children, they take their stuff, what do you think that would have done for the attitude of the people in this empire towards the Jews? There would have been those that would have said, man, these Jews are harsh. I want to get back at them for what they have done to my friends and to my family. And the same is true with each one of us. If you look at it like a married couple that's arguing, okay, you have a husband and wife. Maybe they get into an argument, and my wife does something, and I get onto her. She offends me by something she's done, right? She offends me, and so I'm like, man, I'm offended. So now I'm going to offend her back, right? And when I offend her back, what does that lead her to want to do? Just be like, well, I offended him, so since I offended him, I deserve this offense. No. You want to keep it going, right? Like, well, how dare you say that? Now I'm going to say this, and just continues this circle of retaliation and revenge. And so the person that is offended wants to offend the person that has offended them, and then that person gets offended and they want to offend back, and then it just continues to go back and forth and back and forth. And we may have the right. We may have the right. My wife may say something just totally off, totally off base, something she should never say to me. And I have every right in the world to retaliate and to get revenge for that. But just because I have the right doesn't mean that I should do it. Joseph, when we go back to our story of Joseph, had the right to get revenge and to retaliate against his brothers for them selling him into slavery. And for all that they did to him, it was wrong and it was bad. He had every right. But he didn't take that opportunity. He reconsidered. And so just because we can get revenge doesn't mean that we should get revenge. The second principle that I want us to get from this is that when we're being mistreated, look for the good that God is doing. When somebody is doing something to you that is offending you, that is mistreating you, look for the good that God is doing even in that. James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 says, "My brothers and sisters, when you have many kinds of troubles, you should be full of joy because you know that these troubles test your faith, and this will give you patience." And so what is the good that God is doing even in the midst of somebody mistreating you or offending you? Look for the good in it, because you know that you are growing because of it. In Esther, we see that God is raising up the Jews. He is raising up the Jews through the mistreatment of the Jews. Haman was coming against the Jews to mistreat them, to kill them, to destroy them. But in the midst of Haman trying to beat the Jews down, trying to kill them, God is actually using that to raise them up to prominence and is doing good even in the midst of the evil that is happening. We see that in the midst of this mistreatment, Esther becomes queen. Mordecai becomes second in command. As you read through the end of Esther, it becomes less and less about Esther and more about Mordecai, who Mordecai had spent years of mistreatment from Haman, had spent years of abuse from Haman. And yet here it is, Mordecai is being raised up to power. And God was using that for good. And so we need to see the good that is coming out of it. The Jews no longer had to hide. They no longer had to pretend that they weren't Jews. They could worship out in the open. Joseph saw the good. Joseph saw the good in what his brothers had done. What they had done was evil, but Joseph saw the good in it because he saw what God meant for good. And he wasn't angry. Okay? He wasn't angry with his brothers. I mean, any of us, we would be angry. We'd be holding on to that grudge for years. Joseph, one of the things that really hurt Joseph whenever he saw his brothers, he had, by the way, I said he was 11th brother of 12 brothers. Okay? And he was 10 of his brothers were actually half-brothers of his. So they had the same father, but a different mother. But his youngest brother, the 12th brother, was actually his full brother. His name was Benjamin. And their mother had died. And Joseph, whenever he saw his brothers, there was only the 10 older ones, the ones that showed up. And Joseph longed to be able to see his father. And he began to question his brothers, is your father still alive? Do you have any other brothers? And they said, well, we have one younger brother. Is he still alive? Is he doing well? You could see in reading the story how much Joseph missed his father, how much he missed his little brother. And he missed out on all of that, seeing his little brother, grow up and all of those things. He missed out on that. But he didn't hold a grudge against his brothers for what they did. He wasn't angry at them. He didn't seek revenge because he saw the good and how it all worked out. For us, we can look at our lives and say, what good is God doing, You may get fired from a job. And then it's like, well, this is bad. This is evil. This is not good, right? But yet then we see how God works it out for your good. And we can be tempted and can say, all right, God's going to work this out for our good, but still harbor a grudge and bitterness towards that person that maybe fired us or did that evil against us. And we should not be bitter towards them, but realize that God is working out even what they do that's bad for our good. And so sometimes this works out to better our situation. Sometimes the mistreatment and the things the good that we see happens, it actually betters our situation. You get fired from a job only to find a better one, a better situation, a better paying job, better hours, all of that. And we're just going, man, I wish my boss would have fired me sooner, and it's like you realize how good it can be. Sometimes it betters our situation, but sometimes it's just character building and it's bettering us. It's bettering our character. And we see that here. He says, know that whenever bad things happen, the troubles happen, it's the testing of your faith. It will give you patience. It will give you endurance. It will build you up to make you a better person. And so we can't be angry and we can't be mad. And just realize, that whatever they did is making me better. And I'm thankful for it. Thankful for it. The third principle is that when good comes from bad, replace retaliation with rejoicing. When good comes from bad, replace retaliation with rejoicing. And so if we're able to look at these bad situations, we're able to see the good in it, instead of retaliating, instead of seeking revenge, rejoice and be glad. Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12, Jesus teaches us this. He says, people will insult you and hurt you. They will lie and say all kinds of evil things about you because you follow me. But when they do, you will be blessed. Rejoice and be glad because you have a great reward waiting for you in heaven. People did the same evil things to the prophets who lived before you. Now, side note on this, okay? it says right here, people will insult you, hurt you, tell lies about you, all that, right? And it says they will do it because you follow me, all right? Because you follow Jesus, all right? So if people are saying bad things about you, and it's true, okay, don't use this verse, all right, and say, oh, they're cursing me, they're saying bad things about me, and Jesus said that was going to happen. Don't use this verse in that way, okay? He says if you are doing good, okay, you are doing good, you are doing what's right, you are serving God, you are serving Jesus, and people are still insulting you, and people are hurting you, and they're telling lies about you, don't get upset, don't get mad about it. He says, rejoice and be glad. He says, you will be blessed if that happens. Because they did the same thing to Jesus. They did the same thing to the apostles. They did the same things to the prophets who also lived for God and who did what was right. And so when we see how that there is good that can come from the bad, we should rejoice. We should rejoice and be glad. Rejoice because things are actually better than what they seem, but also because we have a reward in heaven. We have a reward waiting for us in heaven. Esther and Mordecai, they used this date that was set to destroy the Jews, and the date that was set for the Jews to defend themselves. They used this date and set that date as a date of celebration, a date to celebrate the day that God delivered the Jews from their enemies, to celebrate the day that God said, these people came against you and they meant harm for you, but God meant that day for good, and it turned out that everything worked out for God's glory. And they set that day as a day of celebration. They called it the Feast of Purim, okay? The Feast of Purim. And that word Purim, it means lots, okay? Pur or P-U-R, means lot, okay? And the M at the end of it just makes it plural, so it's the day of the Feast of Lots. That may not seem significant, okay? But let me just explain why they chose that. Haman, when he was choosing a day, on the day that he was going to have the Jews destroyed, Haman cast lots to figure out which day it was. Okay, so it was by, and I can't explain exactly what that meant, casting lots, but it's kind of like maybe rolling dice, okay, to figure out which day is the best day, okay, and they had some type of way they figured that out. And so he would go through the days of the calendar, casting lots, trying to figure out which is the best day to kill all the Jews. And the lot happened to land on this day that they chose. It was by kind of a luck or by chance. I believe is more by the hand of God that chose it. But anyway, that's the day that was chosen, and they would have seen it as this is the special day to kill all the Jews. And so Esther and Mordecai said, this is a day, the Feast of Lots, the day that we're going to party and we're going to celebrate, because what man meant for evil, God meant for good. And we're going to celebrate this day. And they said, all Jews, we're going to celebrate this day. And from this day forward, every year at this date, we're going to celebrate this day, because this is the day that God delivered the Jews from the hand of their enemies. And thousands of years later, from that time, the Jews still celebrate the Feast of Purim. They still celebrate it. They'll have a reading of the story of Esther, have a meal, have a time of celebration to remember that day that God delivered them. And so we should do the same. We should celebrate and celebrate what God has done. Let's read about it. It says, but the Jewish people in Susa met on the 13th and 14th days of the month of Adar. Then they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of joyful feasting. It says, so these days were called Purim, which comes from the word pure, the lot, because of everything written in this letter and what they had seen and what happened to them. The Jewish people set up this custom. They and their descendants and all those who join them are always to celebrate these 2 days every year. 2 days, okay? They should do it in the right way and at the time Mordecai had ordered them in the letter. These 2 days should be remembered and celebrated from now on in every family, in every state, and in every city. These days of Purim should always be celebrated by the Jewish people, and their descendants should always remember to celebrate them too. So they celebrate this. I think it's at the end of February. The start of their day is like around 6 o'clock in the evening. And so they'd start at like February 28th and go through like March 2nd or something like that. Anyway, but they do that every year still to this day, remembering what God had done. And so, we often forget to rejoice and to celebrate the things that God has delivered us from. We celebrate it in the moment and when it happens, but then arises another conflict. Arises somebody else that is coming against us, or arises something else in our lives that is worrying us and causing us anxiety, and we forget about what God had done. But think about the Jews, and they have this day to celebrate a feast of how God had delivered them, and they're constantly reminded of the fact that God delivers. God is on our side. God is protecting us. God is working for our good. And if we celebrated, we will remember what God is doing. It would be good if we wrote it down. Sometimes we forget what God does, and we think, I'll remember this for the rest of my life, but then we forget about it. And it would be good if we wrote it down, wrote a date on it. On this day, God answered my prayers. On this day, I saw God help me to overcome this evil that somebody was trying to do towards me. It would be good for us to thank Him for it, to spend time thanking God, to rejoice with others, to tell others, hey, listen to the story of what God did in my life, and to rejoice with other Christians as well. In Romans chapter 12, it says, let God repay those who do evil to you. We don't have to repay. I can let God repay, and I can celebrate the victory. I can know that because God has done it once, God can and will do it again. And the great thing is that there are stories all throughout the Bible. It's all about God doing this, God rescuing His people, God providing for His people over and over and over again. Guess what? We are God's people. So if God has done that in the past, God will continue to do that in the future. And so we can rejoice. We can rejoice in the good that God is doing rather than retaliating and trying to get revenge against those who have done evil towards us. When I was about 20 years ago, I had gone through a year of Bible college, okay? And I knew, God had called me to the ministry. But I had gotten discouraged while I was in college. I wasn't very motivated. I wasn't a very motivated student. I just kind of took the bare minimum to be a full-time student. And then I did okay my first semester. The second semester, I stopped showing up to classes as often as I should have been going to classes. And I failed a class. And so I just didn't do really well. I was discouraged. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to leave college. And I moved back home. And me and my family, we moved back home. And so while I was there, I still wanted to do ministry. It wasn't like I didn't want to be in the ministry. I wanted to do that. I just didn't want to go to school. And so while I was back home, there was this church in East Texas that needed a youth pastor. I was 19 years old, and I knew everything about ministry, so I was like, I'll come be your youth pastor, right? And they hired me. Tiny, tiny little church. And I know, y'all think our church is small. This church was smaller. And so they hired me on. I came to be their youth pastor. And things didn't go so well, I lasted there a whole 2 months, okay? A whole 2 months before they fired me. They called me, pastor called me up one night and he said, me and the leaders in the church have been talking and we'd like to ask for your resignation. And I said, okay, you got it, And so they let me go. And it wasn't anything that I was doing that was super wrong. We just had disagreements about some things that even to this day, I think are really stupid about the way that they believed about some things, okay? And so just to kind of give you the background on some of that, like if I wore shorts out in public, like not even just, like I didn't wear shorts to church for sure, but if I wore shorts out in public, they didn't like that, okay? If I didn't use just the King James Version of the Bible, I was wrong. Okay, if I listen to anything but a certain type of Christian music, like the stuff we play here on Sunday mornings, is like heathen music. Okay, is the way they would have viewed it, and so we just butted heads. Okay, and they fired me and they let me go, and I was a little bitter and a little salty about that. But the thing that it did is that it motivated me to go back to school. And the very next semester, that spring semester, I was ready to go back to school. And instead of just taking the bare minimum requirement of what I needed to be a full-time student, I was taking, 18, 19, 20 hours a semester to try to catch up for what I'd done, but also because I wanted to, I was motivated to learn and to get it done. And so it helped me out tremendously. And so what they may have meant for evil, not really that they were trying to be evil, but it wasn't good. God used it in a good way to motivate me to do what I needed to do. And so, as we, and by the way, it wasn't like immediately I got over that bitterness and stuff. I still struggle with it to this day, some, okay? But as we look at our own lives, okay, we can look back and we can say, okay, I can see where there's been some bad things that people have done to me that actually have turned out good, and I'm so thankful that they did that so that I could end up in the better situation. And we see how God worked that out for our good, okay? And we can do that in the past, but what is something that we're going through today? What are you dealing with right now where you're struggling with somebody that is doing something wrong towards you, that you're trying to figure out, how do I handle this? How do I respond to this? How do I not hold a grudge against them? How do I not stay angry at them? How do I not find ways to retaliate and to get revenge against them? What good is going to come out of this? What good can I see from what they are doing or from what they have done? And sometimes that's hard to see. When you're in the middle of it, when you're in the middle of these things happening, or this person mistreating you or doing whatever it is towards you, when you're right in the middle of it, it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to see the good that can come from it. And so sometimes we just need to hold on to the faith and just say, I know because God is on my side that there is good that's going to come from this. And so to trust God for that, but then also to ask God to help you to see the good that can come from it as well. So I encourage you to look at those in that way, not seek retaliation, not seek revenge. Let God repay for the evil that is done to you. You don't have to repay it. Because, listen, God will. God will repay the evil. And we need to trust Him and to know that He will do it in His time, and He'll do it the right way. When we look at the Bible, one of the biggest stories of and examples of this is the example of Jesus. The story of Jesus going to the cross and being completely obedient to God, not retaliating in any way. And you think of Jesus had the ability, had the right to retaliate. He had done nothing wrong. He was completely innocent. And here these men were, beating Him mercilessly for no good reason. And yet Jesus sat there and took it because he saw the good that was coming from it. He knew the good that would come from that. He was wrongfully beaten. He was wrongfully killed. He didn't try to stop it. He saw the good that would come from it, and the good that would come was the resurrection. The good that would come would be the salvation that he made available to all who believe. Because he took that beating, because he took that death, it made it possible for each one of us to be able to have life with God, to be able to be forgiven of our sins, and to be able to overcome our own evil that is in our own lives. And so for that, we can celebrate. We can celebrate the bad that happened to Jesus because we see the good that came from it. And for each one of us, we have an opportunity to put our faith in Jesus and to believe in Him and to trust in Him for that salvation so that we can have that life with God. And so many of you I know have accepted Christ and you are walking with Him and you believe in what He has done for you. But some of you may not have. You may not have accepted Christ as your Savior. You may not have made that commitment to follow Him and to be made right with Him and to be forgiven of your sins. So I want to give you an opportunity to do that right now. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads, to close your eyes, and I'm going to pray a prayer of salvation to accept Jesus as your Savior. If you'd like to pray that, I invite you to pray along with me, just between you and God. Say, Dear Jesus, I believe that you died for me. I believe that you rose again. I ask you to come into my life, to forgive me of my sins, and to make me right with God. I commit my life to you, to follow you from this day forward. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for saving me. In Jesus' name I pray. Let's all pray. God, we thank you so much for the example that we have of Jesus, that we have of Esther, that we have of Joseph, that we have of Paul, all throughout the Bible, God, of people that could have retaliated, that could have gotten revenge, but didn't. And they allowed you to repay that evil. They saw the good that came from the evil that was done to them, and they realized that their situation and that themselves were better because they went through that. God, I pray that you'll help us to do the same, to realize that just because somebody is doing evil to us, is mistreating us, has done something bad to us, that it doesn't mean that you can't make it something better and make it something good. So God, I pray that you'll help us to learn from that, to grow from that, and to trust you, and to trust in what you are doing. God, we just thank you and we praise you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.